Hey, we're going to be talking about how we've both gotten into writing, so stay tuned. Hey everyone, I'm Dan.
I'm Scott.
And we're with Promethean Entertainment, and today we're going to be talking about how we ended up getting into creative writing and just the basic journey, the hero's journey that got us to this point.
Yes. The inciting incident.
I would say hero is an overused word, but when it comes to writing, it's very appropriately applied to
the
writers of
protagonist.
So, anyway,
Yes.
I'll start with asking you questions
Sure.
about how you got involved in creative writing.
Okay.
What's the genesis? What's Scott's origin story about creative writing?
I like telling stories. I'm not always good. Frequently my stories meander, and I get distracted by something shiny in my story. And what I like to do is I do like to come back and think, how did I get here in my story? Because a lot of times, like with us, or Jim's back there, our conversations will go along, and we'll be 10 minutes down the road and be like, how did we get here?
Tracing the train of thought back to the
beginning.
station.
And usually it's an obscure, absurd route that got us there. But I've always liked telling stories, and I've got some real gems that I wrote in elementary school, in my cursive handwriting, and I had.
When did you like hammer down the point that like I kind of want to try and do this and make money from it, or make a living from it?
Okay, that's good. So yeah, it was there, and then while I was in high school, I had always thought, and I started trying to write some stuff, some longer books, and it's real garbage, like a lot of garbage. But then I did a story during a National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo.
When was that about?
2008-9, I think. It was before 2011. And that was, you got to write 50,000 words in 1 month. It comes out to about 1,600 words and change per day. It's very doable, and I recommend it to everybody because you get something done from beginning to end, or at least you get close to it. And that's something you can work with. So then while I was in the Coast Guard, I found a degree program that was creative writing for entertainment, and it was geared toward the visual arts industry. And it really appealed to me. It really appealed because it wasn't just long form writing or specifically for one media, but for the visual arts industry. And I felt it was very good active writing, visually grabbing people's attention. And then that really honed my skill because I really enjoyed it. I had done proofreading and editing, and I wanted to write. And then this changed. The degree had a class. It was storyboarding and comics. And I had been working on the Steam Patriots story.
Did you do storyboarding art, or is it just
It was
kind of?
It was because it was storyboarding then into cartoons and comic strips and sequential art, and then building to comic books. That made me realize that the comic book medium was great for what I wanted to do with Steam Patriots.
Because you had originally envisioned it as a novel.
As a novel,
correct?
Yep. And then, and it works, and I reread my rough draft, and there's about 40% good in my rough draft, but that again I tell everybody, get something done, because then you can fix it, you can grow from there. If you don't have anything,
the guy I worked with on File 13 said that when he would show copies of File 13 1 and 2 to people, they're like, you're like so much further ahead than most people because you have this, you have this thing, you've created something. So I agree that creating something is important, huge first step in getting something done.
Because the alternative is, how many of us have so many edited to death manuscripts in our filing cabinet?
Or even worse, ideas in your head that you don't even ever get on paper.
Right. So I have enjoyed, I still would really like to write a novel. I'd like to write in long form like that.
Do you think you'd ever circle back and do a Steam Patriots novel, or do you want to do something?
No, I would really like it because, well, every medium has its pluses and minuses, the pros and cons. Because the written word or the written medium or comic books allows you to linger on a page, to reread something, to enjoy the moment, whereas a film keeps moving. It's hard to go back. It's hard.
I just realized for people that aren't fully aware, Steam Patriots is Scott's comic that he's doing with Promethean. It's a steampunk origin story set during the Revolutionary War involving some of the famous people from that period, Ben Franklin, George Washington, but mostly focusing on Felix and Hiram Ward and their journey through that time and the early infancy of steampunk.
Yeah. So the origin story of steampunk in America. And so, but then what the comic book doesn't allow is a lot of, you can't get into their minds a lot. You can't spend time with a lot of...
You could, when people would allow thought balloons in comics, which have become totally passé and unwanted in comics, but I still love them.
I like them too, and there is the caption idea. So there's still the visuals take a lot of precedence, whereas in a novel, you're eliminating that. Now, I read a really cool book, and I'm going to blank on it right now. Explorers Guild, Kevin Costner co-wrote it with somebody, real big tome. And it's a mix of...
Dances with Wolves, Kevin Costner?
Yeah, yeah. He's got his name on it. I don't know how much he wrote it. But it's a mix of prose, pages of prose, and then pages of sequential art. And it's really good, and it's wordy. I know you like wordier comics. I do too. It's good.
At File 13 #1.
Yes. So, and that's as far as I've gotten. And of course, I have a million stories, and that's the way my mind thinks. Like this person's story. Like I'm reading the Jimmy Doolittle biography right now. His story would make an amazing miniseries or comic book, or even his biography reads like a novel.
Yeah, that's the whole Revolutionary War period is just a really rich time
span with
so many characters that I think you picked a really interesting time to delve into and set steampunk's origin in, because there is a lot you can do, and then just tweaking a little and just adding a little bit of the, I guess it's a science fiction element, even though it's steampunk, to that time period is really clever.
There's so much, almost limitless to draw from. So I enjoy that story world. I love building on that. Your story world, File 13, you took from...
Well, I mean, getting back to my origin of when I started
let's go back further.
What I wanted to be when I was a kid was a comic book artist. And one of the first things I did as a first sequential art story was something called Can Man, which has pretty much evolved into File 13. I think I did that when I was about 12 years old. And then over time, my buddy Keith and I, we're Keith Koppenhofer, he's the co-creator of File 13 with me. We started at downtime during work. Both of us had desk jobs where we probably weren't occupied for like 8 hours a day, very office space like. Where every week I think I did an actual 15 minutes of work. In fact, I think I did more than 15 minutes of work, but it wasn't enough to fill 40 hours a week. Yeah. We'd text back and forth, and then we just started talking about that world and these characters. And we were both huge into Venture Brothers at the time. Yeah. Venture Brothers. And we would just like go back and forth, and we were talking about how we could make this into that same sort of absurd, ridiculous sort of world. And then we just started to plot out a story together. And then initially I was going to be the artist, and I started to sketch out, I did storyboarding for the first issue. But I totally recognized I was never going to, between family, work, and everything else, I wasn't going to sit down and draw a 32-page comic book. And that's when we went out and we looked and we found Ryan, and he kind of delved in and really fleshed out that world and really completed the book for us and allowed us to make File 13. But it was just a childhood fever dream of just like craziness and absurdity, like really absurd characters, but really set in a really realistic superhero world. And we both grew up, if you watch any of our previous videos, 80s comics is my bread and butter. It's where I feel most comfortable, and that's what we try and make File 13 into, and what we are emulating when we do that book, is just that same sort of feel, that vibe of a story where each issue is its own story, but if you read them all, you kind of get a whole undercurrent of subplots and everything kind of weaving the whole tale together.
So you have said, you've told me, I don't know if you said it in this video, that you wanted to draw first.
Yes.
Is that how your brain works? Do you think of the visual side and then add the story? Do you think visually?
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because no, I don't think I do, because sometimes like I've worked with other, like my friend Paul, who I have a whole nother world that I'm building with him. Like I would write plots and it would come down to like, he would just be like, there's too much here. This can't fit on a page. So I think that visually I started to like thumbnail and sketch out pages because I realized like I was just like vomiting too much onto a page, and it was way too much for an artist to fit into 6 or 7 panels. So I started to thumbnail that way, and I think that helped me visualize and like realize like how much you can fit on a page realistically, and how much. For any writer, I recommend, even if it's just stick figures, just kind of like sketching out your page as you try and do it, because it'll help you realize, oh, I'm asking this artist to do way too much. This is going to be like 15 panels on this page. That's ridiculous.
And I often hear people say animation or comics has an unlimited special effects budget. That's not true, because you, as the writer, you can imagine explosion after battle, after epic moment, after panel, boom, 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 fight, slash. Like if you wanted to draw out like a R.A. Salvatore sword fight, you would need to pay your artist $1 million.
Because you're thinking of it being one page, but any artist is going to say, this is like 4 or 5 or 6 pages if you really want to show what's written on this page. So I super recommend, even if it's just stick figures, thumbnailing out your pages so that you get a better feel for the pacing of what you're trying to ask for.
And I love the comic book world because you can put words and pictures together.
And that, I mean, I hinted at it before about thought balloons, but I always felt like that was what was special about comics and what separated them from films. Is like you could do a narration like you kind of have in like a Blade Runner movie, but sometimes it's distracting to have somebody talking over while you're trying to watch a film. But in a comic, it was natural to read a thought balloon and get inside the character's head. And a lot of people say, well, no one's like that. No one has an internal dialogue. And I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Like I constantly have an internal dialogue going on in my head always. And like, so for people to say like, no one acts like that. I'm like, I do all the time.
And so it works especially for like Spider-Man. That he's always like he's making gags and with himself. He's got his inside thing going. Yeah. He's making fun of Dr. Octopus verbally and mentally. Yeah. And
sometimes it doesn't make sense for them to be saying something, or you really can't get into the mind of the character just through a visual or through a bit of dialogue. Yeah. You want to just like get into their head. And it's like I think that happened during the 90s. I think it was maybe like a Brian Michael Bendis thing. I don't want to put all the blame on him, but if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But I think it was the kind of him who he said that like people don't really act that way, and I'm like, I disagree. I have a constant. I heard that there are some people that don't have like an internal dialogue. I'm like, wow, that's so foreign to me. Yeah. But I can't visualize.
Or people that don't
aphantasia. So.
Right. People that don't think in pictures too. They don't.
That's me. Yeah. I can't visualize stuff.
Oh, you can't visualize. Oh.
Like if I close my eyes and you tell me to picture an orange circle, I cannot do it. It's called aphantasia for anyone that doesn't know.
Oh, that's
and that's me. I know.
That's wow.
And for an artist, like I think that's why I'm so much better at like if I like look at something and draw it, I'm really good. And I'm pretty good at like drawing from the top of my head. But like I'm always better if I look at something and draw from reference. But it's fascinating because I never knew I was weird until I started asking people, and I was like, oh wow! Like a couple of years ago, I found out that it's like a thing. It's called aphantasia, and like you can't visualize when I close my eye. All I see is black. I can't. Wow. If you told me to picture an orange circle, I can't see it.
Wow. That'd be a really boring movie called Aphantasia.
that was Walt Disney's much lesser known film from the same time period. That was just a black screen.
90 minutes of. Well, here's one. Do you ever? I know we're running out of time here. Do you ever hear music and hear that as a soundtrack to something?
Yes.
Yeah, I do it all the time.
Like especially like when I'm visually in, like, or even you guys talked about role playing games a little while ago. But it's the same thing. I always like imagine soundtracks to like scenes and everything.
Yeah. I have growing up. I had this handful of CDs of classical music, and it was a mix. And there's a couple songs that don't quite fit the genre, but I was reading all of the Dragonlance books at the time, and I was reading like the Dark Elf, like with Drizzt and all that. And those songs are Menzoberranzan and Drizzt, and like I've got those songs, and every time I hear them, I think of those of the Dragonlance
have to be like
books.
A whole another episode
music
about
and
music and art and everything, and
we've gone
tying
over
it all together.
Gone over as usual. Like, share. Questions.
Ring the bell.
You know what to do. Share. We've got more of these stories coming up. If you want to know, delve deeper into our minds, ask us questions in the comments and so forth. Folks, thanks for watching.
Thank you.
That's it for now. See ya.